The bonds between mother and child transcend language, culture, and even species. But what happened in Pine Ridge last winter challenges everything we thought we knew about animal intelligence and the invisible threads that connect our world. When a severely wounded grizzly bear brought her 3 cubs to a village doctor's doorstep, no one could have imagined the extraordinary secret she carried. A secret that would change the lives of everyone in this remote mountain community forever. This is the remarkable true story of courage, instinct, and a mystery decades in the making that finally found its answer on the coldest night of the year. The village of Pine Ridge, nestled against the rugged slopes of the Blackwater Mountains, like a child seeking shelter against its mother's side. Here, where civilization's reach ended and wilderness began, Dr. Elena Petrov had found her purpose. The small wooden clinic, with its faded green trim and metal roof, stood at the village's edge, serving as both a boundary marker and a bridge between 2 worlds. Elena had come to Pine Ridge 5 years earlier, leaving behind a prestigious position at the National Zoo, seeking something the sterile halls of modern medicine couldn't provide: connection. The crisp autumn morning painted the landscape in brilliant oranges and fiery reds as Elena made her usual rounds. Inside the modest clinic, the familiar scent of antiseptic mingled with pine from the fresh boughs Liam Chen, her young assistant, had brought in to freshen the place up. At 20, Liam embodied the village's new generation, born in Pine Ridge, but educated through online courses from universities across the country. His grandfather had been the village's traditional healer, and Liam walked the delicate line between ancient wisdom and modern science with effortless grace. "Morning rounds are done," Elena said, hanging her stethoscope on a wooden peg by the door. "The orphaned fox kit is finally eating on his own, and the injured hawk's wing is healing nicely." She poured herself a cup of coffee from the ancient percolator that had come with the clinic. The bitter warmth spread through her chest as she glanced at the weather report on her tablet. "Looks like we're in for an early winter. The first major storm is moving in faster than expected." Liam nodded solemnly as he organized supplies on the metal shelves. "Grandmother Sophia says it will be the harshest in 30 years. The squirrels have been gathering twice their normal amount of nuts, and the elk herds moved to lower elevation 2 weeks earlier than usual." Elena had learned to respect these traditional observations as much as meteorological reports. The natural indicators rarely missed. "We should prepare for more injuries then. Animals take risks when food becomes scarce." She mentally catalogued their medical supplies, making notes of what they might need to replenish before the mountain passes became impassable. Through the window, Elena watched as Miguel Ramirez's Forest Service truck pulled into the gravel driveway. The ranger's usual easy smile was absent as he strode toward the clinic, clutching his radio tightly. His expression immediately told Elena something was wrong in their peaceful slice of wilderness. High in the remote reaches of Eagle Valley, where even experienced hikers rarely ventured, a grizzly bear moved purposefully through the golden underbrush. She was magnificent despite her limp, a massive female with distinctive scarring across her right shoulder from some long-ago encounter. The scar had earned her the name Slash among the rangers who occasionally tracked bear movements in the Blackwater Mountains. Behind her, 3 cubs followed in a straggling line. The oldest, a male nearly the size of a yearling, watched over his smaller siblings with surprising vigilance. The middle cub, female and curious by nature, constantly wandered off path to investigate interesting scents or sounds, while the smallest male stayed close to his mother's heels, his movements unusually cautious for such a young bear. Slash paused at a small stream, her powerful nose testing the air currents. The water level had dropped significantly since their last visit, another sign of the changing season. Her cubs drank eagerly while she stood guard, her weight shifted to favor her right front paw, a paw that now barely touched the ground. The injury wasn't fresh, But it had worsened over the past weeks, a deep-seated infection spreading upward from a wound near her pad. Most mothers with 3 cubs would already have denned for the winter, especially with the unusually early chill in the air. But Slash continued to lead her family on a determined journey downslope, away from their usual territory, guided by something beyond normal bear behavior, something that seemed almost like memory. Miguel leaned against the clinic's examination table, his ranger hat twisted nervously in his hands. "We've had unusual bear movement all along the eastern ridge," he explained, pointing to locations on the faded wall map. "A female grizzly with 3 cubs has been steadily moving toward the village for the past week. Cameras picked her up at 4 different locations, each one closer to Pine Ridge." Elena frowned, studying the progression. That's not typical migration behavior, especially not with cubs that age. "That's not all," Miguel continued. "She's injured. The footage shows her heavily favoring her front right paw, barely putting weight on it, and she's lost condition, ribs showing where they shouldn't be this time of year." Liam looked up from the supplies he was organizing. Could it be Slash? Rangers spotted her with new cubs in the high country last spring. Miguel nodded. "Same shoulder scar, but she's never come this close to human settlement before. Something's driving her down, and it's not just food." The clinic's radio crackled to life with a message from the fire watch tower on the western ridge. "Major storm system accelerating. Expect first snowfall tonight. Heavy accumulation by morning. All personnel advised to prepare for potential power outages." Elena closed her eyes briefly, calculating the implications. An injured mother, bear with hungry cubs, moving toward the village with a blizzard approaching. It was a dangerous combination. Normally, they would alert wildlife services and have a team ready to intervene, but the storm would prevent any outside help from reaching them for days. "We should set up deterrents along the forest edge," Miguel suggested. "Keep her away from the village." Elena found herself oddly reluctant. "Let's monitor first. If she's as injured as you say, driving her back into the mountains with a storm coming could be a death sentence for all 4 of them." The ranger's eyebrows rose in surprise. "You're suggesting we let a wounded grizzly with 3 cubs approach the village?" Elena couldn't explain the intuition pulling at her. "Just until we understand what's happening. There's something unusual about this behavior. Bears this experienced don't approach settlements randomly." As the first snowflakes began to swirl outside the window, Elena felt a strange certainty settle in her chest. Something extraordinary was unfolding in their quiet corner of the world, though she couldn't yet imagine what form it would take. The storm arrived with unexpected ferocity, transforming the golden autumn landscape into a white wasteland overnight. By morning, 3 feet of snow blanketed Pine Ridge, with more falling, in thick sheets that obscured visibility beyond a few yards. Elena had spent the night at the clinic, listening to the wind howl against the windows as she prepared emergency supplies, both for the village residents and any wildlife casualties the storm might bring. Liam arrived at dawn, having navigated the short distance from his grandmother's house on snowshoes. "Half the village is without power," he reported, stamping snow from his boots. "Lines down on the north side. The road to the county seat is completely blocked." Elena nodded grimly. "We're on our own for at least 3 days, according to the latest forecast." She handed him a mug of hot tea. "Any word from Miguel?" He radioed from the eastern firebreak. "Found fresh bear tracks headed this way. Adult female with cubs. The prints show an uneven gait, confirming she's injured. He said the right front paw barely makes an impression." Elena moved to the medicine cabinet, taking mental inventory of their wildlife tranquilizers and antibiotics. If the bear's condition was as serious as she suspected, they might need to intervene, storm or no storm. "How close?" Liam's expression tightened. less than a mile out, moving slowly but deliberately. Miguel thinks. He hesitated, as if uncertain whether to continue. What does he think, Liam? He says it looks like she's heading directly for the village. Not circling, not foraging, like she has a destination in mind. A knock at the door interrupted them. Grandmother Sophia stood on the threshold, her tiny frame nearly lost in layers of handmade wool blankets. Despite her 87 years, she had traversed the snow-covered pathways with the sure-footedness of someone half her age. "You have visitors coming," she announced without preamble, her dark eyes sharp with an emotion Elena couldn't quite place. "The guardian is returning." Elena helped the elder to a chair. "What guardian, grandmother?" Sophia's weathered hands trembled slightly as she accepted a cup of tea. "There is a story passed down in our family. My grandfather told of a time when a great bear brought healing instead of fear. I thought it was just a story to make children brave." She looked up at Elena, her expression solemn. "But now I wonder." Before Elena could ask for clarification, the clinic's radio crackled urgently. Miguel's voice came through in broken bursts. "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." "Elena, bear family at your back door now." Elena and Liam rushed to the rear windows. Through the swirling snow, they could make out dark shapes moving slowly across the white landscape. The mother bear's massive form was unmistakable as she limped determinedly toward the clinic, her 3 cubs following closely behind. "My God," Elena whispered, "she's coming straight to us." As they watched in astonishment, the injured bear reached the edge of the small covered porch that extended from the clinic's rear entrance. With visible effort, she urged her cubs up onto the wooden platform, out of the deepening snow. Then, with a movement that defied everything Elena knew about wild animal behavior, the bear deliberately positioned herself facing the door, sat down heavily, and fixed her gaze on the window where the humans stood watching. The message couldn't have been clearer if she had spoken aloud. "Help us." Elena's medical training battled with her instincts as she stared at the improbable scene unfolding behind her clinic. Everything she had been taught about wildlife management warned against what she was considering. Wild bears, especially mothers with cubs, were unpredictable and dangerous. Approaching them without proper equipment and backup was potentially suicidal. "We need to call wildlife services," Liam said, his voice tight with anxiety. "They can't get here for days," Elena reminded him. "By then." She didn't finish the sentence. The bear's labored breathing was visible even through the snow, her massive sides heaving with effort. Grandmother Sophia moved to stand beside them at the window. "She has chosen to come to you," the elder said simply. "That is rare medicine." The radio crackled again as Miguel reported from his observation position near the tree line. "Elena, I've got a tranquilizer rifle, but in this weather I can't guarantee accuracy. And if I miss, a frightened, wounded bear with cubs would be catastrophic." Elena finished his thought. "Hold your position, Miguel. Don't approach yet." Outside, one of the cubs, the smallest, collapsed into the snow, its strength apparently failing. The mother bear gently nudged it with her nose, urging it back to its feet. The sight sent a surge of emotion through Elena that transcended professional detachment. "They won't survive without intervention," she said quietly, "and she knows it." Liam looked at her with wide eyes. "You're going to help them, aren't you?" Elena took a deep breath, decision crystallizing. "Not out there. We need to bring them in." "Bring a grizzly family into the clinic?" Liam's voice rose in disbelief. "Dr. Petrov, that's unprecedented," she agreed. "But look at her. She's not displaying any aggression. She's protecting her cubs from the storm and seeking help. I've never seen behavior like this, but I can't ignore it." Elena moved quickly, gathering supplies and formulating a plan. We'll tranquilize her first. Minimal dose, just enough to keep her calm without fully sedating her. The cubs should be easier to manage if their mother isn't distressed. She radioed Miguel with instructions to approach carefully from the side with the tranquilizer gun. Then she turned to Liam and Sophia. This goes against every protocol, but sometimes medicine requires improvisation. I need you both to help, but only if you're willing to accept the risk. Grandmother Sophia smiled slightly. Some would say this is exactly why you were called to Pine Ridge, Doctor. Liam hesitated, only briefly before nodding. My grandfather would never forgive me if I walked away from this. Through the window, the mother bear's eyes seemed to meet Elena's across the snowy divide, intelligent, desperate, and filled with a trust that defied explanation. In that moment, Elena knew that regardless of the danger, she was exactly where she needed to be. What few people in Pine Ridge knew about Elena Petrov was that before her prestigious position at the National Zoo, she had spent 3 years with a wildlife rehabilitation program in Alaska, specializing in bears. It had been demanding, dangerous work, treating orphaned cubs and injured adults, preparing them for release back into the wild whenever possible. That experience had ended abruptly after a traumatic incident left her questioning her career. Choice entirely. Now, as she prepared the rear treatment room, those hard-earned skills resurfaced. She moved with calm efficiency, transforming the space into a temporary den. Heavy blankets covered the floor, examination lights were dimmed, and barriers created a contained space where the bears could rest without accessing the rest of the clinic. I need the large animal antibiotics from the secure cabinet, she instructed. Liam, and the thermal imaging scanner will need to assess her injury without causing additional stress. As Liam gathered supplies, Elena opened a locked drawer she rarely accessed. Inside lay specialized tools for wildlife emergencies. Heavy gloves reinforced with Kevlar, a face shield, and most importantly, a small case containing vials of a sedative mixture specifically formulated for large carnivores. Miguel appeared. At the back door, snow caking his uniform. Tranquilizer loaded. But Elena, I have to register my professional objection to this plan. Noted, she replied, filling a syringe with precise movements. But that bear made her choice when she brought her family to our doorstep. Now we make ours. Elena handed specific instructions to each of her reluctant assistants. Miguel would administer the tranquilizer from a controlled distance. Liam would help move the cubs once the mother was sedated. Grandmother Sophia, surprisingly, insisted on staying to monitor the bear's spiritual well-being, a concept Elena might have dismissed years ago, but now accepted as valid as any medical observation. The dose is calibrated to keep her conscious but calm, Elena explained. Complete sedation is too risky in her weakened state. This means she'll still be aware and capable of movement, which makes this exponentially more dangerous for us. The plan set, Elena opened the rear door just enough to establish visual contact with the bear. The massive animal raised her head, those intelligent eyes meeting Elena's without hostility. Something passed between woman and bear in that silent exchange, an understanding that transcended species. I'm going to help you, Elena said softly, knowing the words meant nothing to the animal, but speaking them anyway. I need you to trust me. As if in response, the mother bear lowered her massive head slightly, a gesture that sent an inexplicable chill down Elena's spine. Miguel positioned himself and took the shot with expert precision. The tranquilizer dart hit the bear's thick shoulder muscle exactly as intended. The mother bear flinched but didn't respond aggressively. Instead, she shook her head slightly as the fast-acting sedative began to take effect, her movements becoming more deliberate. What happened next astonished everyone present. Instead of needing to be guided, the mother bear slowly rose to her feet and with a soft grunt to her cubs, limped toward the open door. The cubs followed hesitantly, staying close to their mother's massive form. "She's coming in on her own," Liam whispered incredulously. "She understands." Elena stepped back, allowing the bear family to enter the prepared space. The mother bear surveyed the room with alert but increasingly drowsy eyes before carefully lowering herself onto the blankets. Her 3 cubs immediately huddled against her, their small bodies trembling with cold and fear. As Elena closed the doctor behind them, securing the bear family inside the clinic, she felt an overwhelming sense that they had just crossed a threshold from which there was no return. Whatever happened next would require everything she had learned in her career. And, perhaps more importantly, everything she had forgotten to prevent herself from remembering. With the bear family settled in the treatment room, Elena's medical training took over. Her hands moved with steady precision as she assembled diagnostic equipment while instructing Liam in hushed tones. "We'll assess the cubs first, while the sedative keeps the mother calm. They're suffering from exposure and malnutrition, but appear otherwise uninjured." She filled 3 syringes with a nutrient-rich solution. "This will stabilize them until we can get some food into their systems." Liam prepared warming blankets, his initial fear giving way to professional focus. "The smallest one seems worst. Off, dehydrated, probably hypothermic." Elena nodded in agreement. "Start subcutaneous fluids on that one immediately." Grandmother Sophia settled into a corner chair, her weathered hands working wooden prayer beads as she watched the proceedings. With attentive eyes, her presence, though scientifically superfluous, brought a calming energy to the chaotic situation that even Elena appreciated. Miguel maintained his position near the door, tranquilizer rifle still at the ready. "How long will that sedative keep her manageable?" 2 hours at most," Elena replied, not looking up from her examination of the smallest cub. "We need to work efficiently." The mother bear observed everything with drowsy but alert eyes. The tranquilizer had done its job. She remained conscious but calm, occasionally making soft grunting sounds to reassure her cubs, but otherwise allowing the humans to work. It was behavior so atypical that Elena kept finding herself distracted by its implications. Once the cubs were stabilized, Elena turned her attention to the real challenge, the mother's injured paw. Using the thermal imaging scanner, she could see the angry red bloom of infection spreading up the leg from a deep puncture wound. "This isn't recent," she murmured, studying the images. "The infection has been developing for weeks. She must have been in excruciating pain." She looked up at Miguel. How did she even make it this far? The ranger shook his head in wonder. "Pure maternal determination. I've seen it before, but never to this extreme." Elena developed a treatment protocol quickly, a powerful course of antibiotics, drainage of the infected tissue, and careful cleaning of the wound. It would require getting dangerously close to the bear's most powerful weapons, her teeth and claws, even in her sedated state. "Liam, prepare the strongest antibiotic combination we have. Miguel, I need your assistance with restraint." She hesitated, then added, "If she becomes aggressive at any point, the cubs become your priority. Get them to safety first." As they prepared for the delicate procedure, Grandmother Sophia spoke for the first time since the bears had entered. "She will not harm you, Doctor. She knows why she has come." Elena wanted to dismiss the statement as superstition, but something in the elder's confident tone resonated with her own inexplicable sense that this encounter was far from random. With careful movements, Elena approached the mother bear, speaking in soft, even tones. "I need to treat your paw now. This will hurt, but it's necessary." As if understanding the words, the massive bear slowly extended her injured limb, exposing the wounded paw to Elena's examination. The gesture was so deliberate, so cooperative, that everyone in the room froze momentarily in astonishment. "Did you see that?" Liam whispered. It's like she understands. Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the storm raging outside. Something extraordinary was happening here, something that challenged everything she thought she knew about wildlife behavior. But answers would have to wait. Right now, saving this remarkable bear and her family was all that mattered. The procedure to clean and treat the mother bear's infected paw demanded every ounce of Elena's medical skill and courage. Despite the sedative, the massive animal remained conscious, her dark eyes tracking Elena's movements with unsettling intelligence. "Hold her legs steady," Elena instructed Miguel, who gripped the limb with both hands despite his obvious tension. The bear's relaxed state could change in an instant if pain overcame the sedative's effects. Elena worked methodically, first cleaning the visible wound, a deep puncture that appeared to have been caused by a sharp metal object, perhaps an old trap fragment or discarded hunting debris. The infection had spread alarmingly, creating pockets of purulent discharge that required drainage. "This is going to be painful," she warned, though whether she was speaking to her assistants or the bear herself wasn't entirely clear. With surgical precision, she lanced the first abscess, releasing foul-smelling discharge. The mother bear flinched but made no aggressive move, her only reaction a deep, rumbling growl that vibrated through the room. The cubs, sensing their mother's distress, began whimpering. The largest cub took a protective stance, eyeing the humans with newfound wariness. "Liam, focus on keeping the cubs calm," Elena directed without looking up from her work. "Talk to them. Let them know their mother is safe." To everyone's surprise, Liam began singing softly, an old lullaby his grandmother had taught him, its melody flowing through the tense atmosphere like water over stones. The cubs settled almost immediately, their attention captured by the unexpected sound. Elena continued cleaning and debriding the wound, applying topical antibiotics before giving the first injection of systemic medication. This should help with the infection, but she'll need multiple doses over several days. The mother bear remained remarkably cooperative throughout the procedure, flinching occasionally when pain broke through the sedative haze, but never attempting to withdraw her paw or respond aggressively. When Elena finally finished bandaging the wound, the bear pulled her paw back slowly, examining the white wrapping with what could only be described as curiosity. "I've never seen anything like this," Miguel said, his earlier skepticism giving way to wonder. "It's almost like she knew to come here." "First stage complete," Elena announced, discarding her gloves. "Now we need to get nutrition into all of them while maintaining a safe environment." She checked her watch. "The sedative will start wearing off soon." Liam prepared high-calorie feed appropriate for bears, a mixture of protein, fats, and carbohydrates that would help restore their depleted energy reserves. The cubs took to the food eagerly, their initial fear forgotten in the face of hunger. The mother watched her young feed before cautiously accepting food herself, eating with deliberate movements that suggested she was fighting increasing drowsiness. As the bears ate, Elena noticed something catching the light around the mother's neck, something that didn't belong in nature. Moving closer, she peered through the thick fur, her breath catching as she made out what appeared to be the faded remains of a collar, so embedded in the growing bear's neck that fur had grown around it almost completely. "Miguel," she called softly, "look at this." The ranger leaned in, squinting. "Is that a tracking collar? It's ancient, nothing like what we use now." Elena's mind raced. A collar would mean she's been tagged before, has a history with humans. She turned to grandmother Sophia. "You mentioned a story about a guardian bear. Could this be connected?" The elder's eyes widened, her hands stilling on her prayer beads. "The stories say the guardian was marked by human hands but returned to the wild. That was many winters ago." "We need to check for a microchip," Elena decided. "If she was part." Of a research program or rehabilitation effort, there might be records. As she reached for the scanner, the mother bear's eyes began to clear, the sedative wearing off faster than anticipated. A low, rumbling growl filled the room as the massive animal shifted her weight, her movements becoming more coordinated. "Everyone back," Elena ordered. "The sedative is wearing off. We need to give her space." The humans retreated to the far side of the room as the mother bear rose to her full height, an awesome, terrifying reminder of the wild power they had temporarily tamed. For a tense moment, she stood swaying slightly, her gaze moving from human to human, as if assessing them. Then, in a movement that defied explanation, she lowered herself back to the blankets and placed her bandaged paw carefully in front of her, as if acknowledging the treatment. The cubs immediately returned to her side, seeking warmth and reassurance. "She's choosing to stay," Liam whispered incredulously, "even without the sedative." Elena nodded slowly, her scientific mind struggling to reconcile what she was witnessing. "For now, but our first attempt at treatment is just the beginning. That infection is deep-seated. She'll need much more care before she's truly healing." As night fell over Pine Ridge, the blizzard intensified, sealing the unlikely companions together in the small clinic. Elena established a rotation of watches, ensuring someone monitored the bears at all times while allowing the others to rest. The mother bear's behavior remained calm but alert, her intelligent eyes following Elena with an intensity that raised questions no textbook could answer. By morning, promising signs of improvement were visible. The cubs appeared stronger after a night of warmth and proper nutrition, their playful nature beginning to emerge as they wrestled cautiously on the blankets. The mother bear's fever had dropped slightly, and the angry red streaks climbing from her paw had receded. Evidence that the antibiotics were taking effect. Elena carefully changed the bandage, pleased to find reduced swelling and drainage. "The immediate intervention helped," she told her team, "but we're not out of the woods yet." Miguel had ventured out at dawn to check on the village and report their unusual situation to regional authorities. He returned with a satellite phone, the only reliable communication with the outside world while cell towers remained down. "Highway Department says it'll be at least 2 more days before they can clear the pass," he reported, brushing snow from his jacket. "Wildlife Services is monitoring via our updates, but they're trusting your judgment on site." Elena nodded, running a hand through her disheveled hair. "We need to identify her. That collar fragment might be our only clue to understanding why she sought human help." While the mother bear dozed, still weakened from her ordeal, Elena carefully examined the embedded collar using a portable X-ray device. The images revealed a small metal tracking unit partially encased in the growing bear's tissue, an outdated model at least a decade old. "It should have fallen off or broken away as she grew," Elena mused. "This design was meant to be temporary." Liam, who had been researching on the clinic's emergency-powered computer, called Elena over excitedly. "I found something in the regional wildlife database. 15 years ago, there was a bear rehabilitation program about 60 miles north of here. They raised orphaned cubs and released them with tracking collars." Elena studied the scanned documents, her pulse quickening, cross-reference with any incidents involving female cubs with shoulder injuries. After several minutes of searching, Liam found what they were looking for: a case file with faded photographs of a female cub with distinctive scarring on her right shoulder, the result of an attack that had killed her mother. The cub had been rehabilitated and released with an experimental tracking collar. The program's final notes indicated the bear had eventually stopped transmitting and was presumed to have died or moved beyond tracking range. Subject demonstrated unusual cognitive abilities and human recognition patterns, Elena read aloud from the report. Caretakers noted exceptional memory and problem-solving skills compared to other rehabilitated cubs. Grandmother Sophia nodded slowly. The Guardian story begins with a small bear saved by human hands. The elders nursed her back to health before returning her to the mountains. "This could be the same bear," Elena said, excitement building in her voice. "It would explain her behavior. She's returning to humans for help because she associates us with healing." Their breakthrough was interrupted by a distressed whimper from the treatment area. The smallest cub had collapsed again, its breathing labored and shallow. The mother bear nudged her young urgently, looking up at Elena with what could only be described as pleading. Elena rushed to examine the struggling cub, her earlier optimism evaporating. "He's crashing." The exposure and malnutrition hit him hardest because of his size. She felt the cub's rapid, irregular heartbeat with growing alarm. "He needs intensive intervention immediately." As they worked desperately to stabilize the smallest cub, the mother bear's demeanor changed dramatically. She paced anxiously despite her injury, her vocalizations shifting from low rumbles to higher-pitched sounds of distress. The other cubs huddled together, sensing the crisis. "She knows how serious this is," Liam said, preparing an IV line with Elena's guidance. "Look at her face." Indeed, the mother bear's expression conveyed something remarkably close to human worry, an awareness of potential loss that transcended animal instinct. She watched every movement of Elena's hands as they worked to save her smallest cub, her own discomfort seemingly forgotten. Hours passed in tense effort. The smallest cub's condition stabilized temporarily, then deteriorated again as his small body struggled against the combined effects of hypothermia, malnutrition, and possible underlying congenital weakness. By evening, despite their best efforts, his breathing became increasingly labored. The mother bear's behavior grew more agitated. She huffed and paced, occasionally approaching the humans before retreating, as if trying to communicate something urgent. During one approach, she deliberately nudged Elena's medical bag, causing several vials to spill out. "What is she doing?" Miguel asked, tensing at the bear's proximity. Elena watched in fascination as the mother bear sniffed the scattered vials, then deliberately placed her paw on one specific container, a bottled herbal tincture grandmother Sophia had provided earlier, but Elena had set aside, favoring conventional medications. "She's selecting a treatment," Elena said incredulously. Grandmother Sophia moved closer, her eyes wide. "That's strength bark extract, traditional medicine for fever and weakness. My grandfather gathered it from the high country." The mother bear huffed insistently, nudging the bottle again, while looking directly at Elena. "This isn't possible," Elena whispered, scientific training battling with the evidence before her eyes. How would she know? A sudden realization dawned on her. Unless she's familiar with it from the wild, bears self-medicate with certain plants. If this herb grows in her territory. With the smallest cub failing despite conventional treatments, Elena made a decision that defied medical protocol but honored the extraordinary circumstances. She incorporated Grandmother Sophia's herbal remedy into the treatment plan, adding it to the intravenous fluids while continuing supportive care. As night fell for the second time, the crisis reached its peak. The smallest cub's breathing became so labored that Elena prepared for the worst, her heart heavy with the knowledge that they might lose him despite their best efforts. The mother bear remained vigilant, her massive body curled protectively around her struggling young one, her eyes never leaving Elena's face. In the quiet darkness of that long night, as the blizzard howled outside, Elena found herself whispering the same prayer her grandmother had taught her long ago, a prayer for healing that transcended specific faith, connecting to something deeper and more universal. Beside her, Grandmother Sophia's soft chanting joined her words, their voices intertwining in the silent clinic. Whether it was the combined treatments, the warmth of his mother's body, or something more mysterious, the smallest cub's breathing gradually steadied as midnight passed. By dawn, his fever had broken, and he accepted water for the first time in hours. Elena checked his vital signs with cautious hope. He's responding. It's not a complete recovery, but he's fighting. The mother bear's relief was palpable. She gently groomed her recovering cub with careful sweeps of her tongue, occasionally looking up at Elena with that same unsettling intelligence, an awareness that seemed to recognize the partnership that had saved her little one's life. What none of them could yet know was that this crisis and its resolution had forged a connection that would soon reveal the true secret the mother bear carried, a secret that would change their understanding of the natural world forever. The third day of the storm brought a temporary lull in the blizzard conditions, though the snow remained deep and the roads impassable. The bear family's condition had stabilized, the mother's infection was responding to treatment, and all three cubs, including the smallest, were showing improvements in strength and vitality. Elena took advantage of the weather break to contact wildlife authorities via satellite phone, updating them on the unprecedented situation and requesting historical records from bear rehabilitation programs throughout the region. If their theory was correct, and this remarkable mother bear had indeed been rehabilitated by humans years ago, those records might provide crucial context for her extraordinary behavior. As the humans conferred in the front office, the bears remained in the makeshift den of the treatment room. Elena had installed a wildlife camera to monitor them remotely, allowing observation without disturbance. What the camera captured during those private moments only deepened the mystery. "Dr. Petrov, you need to see this," Liam called, studying the camera feed with wide eyes. On the screen, the mother bear was engaged in behavior so unusual that Elena initially struggled to process what she was seeing. Using her claws with surprising dexterity, the bear was deliberately arranging small objects on the floor, medicine bottle caps, a tongue depressor, and several cotton balls into distinct patterns. "Is she playing?" Miguel asked uncertainly. Elena watched, transfixed, as the pattern took shape, a rough circular arrangement with smaller objects placed inside at specific intervals. That's not random. There's intentionality there. Grandmother Sophia leaned closer to the screen, her weathered face illuminated by its glow. "She is making a map," the elder said with quiet certainty. "The circle is our valley. The objects inside are locations." Though skeptical, Elena couldn't dismiss the possibility. She had studied enough animal cognition research to know that the line between instinct and intelligence was far blurrier than science once believed. If she is trying to communicate something specific, we need to understand what. The feed showed the mother bear looking directly at the camera as if aware of their observation, before deliberately adding another object to her arrangement, a small red bottle cap placed at the edge of the circle. "That's where we are," Miguel said. Suddenly, the clinic sits at the eastern edge of the valley just like that. A chill ran through Elena. She's not just making patterns, she's trying to tell us something. The mother bear's behavior grew more urgent as the day progressed. She became restless, repeatedly approaching the door leading to the main clinic before returning to her cubs. Her recovered strength was evident in her more coordinated movements, her injured paw clearly healing, though still bandaged. By afternoon, a new development forced their hand. The largest cub began showing symptoms similar to his mother's original: infection, lethargy, elevated temperature, and sensitivity in his front paw. Examination revealed a small puncture wound, previously unnoticed beneath his thick fur. "It's the same type of injury," Elena confirmed after scanning the cub's paw. "This isn't coincidence." Miguel's expression darkened. If two bears have similar puncture wounds, there's something out there causing them. Old traps, debris, or someone deliberately hurting them, Liam finished quietly. The theory crystallized Elena's growing suspicion. That's why she came here, not just for treatment, but to show us there's a threat to other animals. She studied the arrangement. The bear had created. She's trying to show us where. The mother bear's agitation increased whenever they approached her map, her vocalizations changing to short, emphatic huffs that seemed deliberately communicative. When Elena brought a topographical map of the valley and laid it on the floor, the bear immediately focused on it, looking between the human map and her own creation. This goes against everything I was taught about wild animal behavior, Elena said, but I think she's trying to guide us somewhere specific. The storm has cleared enough for limited travel, Miguel offered. I could take the snowmobile to investigate if we can figure out where she's indicating. Elena shook her head. Not alone. And we can't leave the bears unattended. She made a decision that would have seemed insane just days earlier. I think she needs to show us herself. The plan that developed was unprecedented in wildlife management, allowing a partially recovered wild bear to guide humans to a location of her choosing. Under normal circumstances, the proper protocol would be to treat and release the bears once healthy, then conduct independent investigations of potential hazards. But these circumstances were far from normal. The cubs can remain here under Liam and Grandmother Sophia's care, Elena proposed. The mother appears to trust us now, and her injury is improved enough for limited movement. Miguel and I can follow her with the tracking drone overhead to document everything. Follow a grizzly bear into the wilderness? Deliberately? Miguel's expression reflected the plan's audacity. Wildlife services will never approve this. Oh, that's why we're not asking permission, Elena replied. Sometimes you have to trust what's in front of you over what's in the textbook. As they prepared equipment for the unorthodox expedition, Grandmother Sophia approached Elena privately. There is more to my grandfather's story than I told you, the elder said, her voice low. The guardian bear did not just receive healing, she gave it in return. She led the elders to healing plants they had not known before, plants that saved many during a terrible sickness. Elena paused in her preparations. You think that's what she's trying to do now? Show us something that could help others? The elder's dark eyes held Elena's gaze. The guardian sees beyond what humans see. She understands connections we have forgotten. By evening, their preparations were complete. The smallest cub had recovered enough to play with his siblings, though the largest now required treatment for his infected paw. The mother bear watched the humans' activities with that same unsettling intelligence, her behavior suggesting not just understanding, but anticipation. As dawn broke on the fourth day, the storm had diminished to occasional flurries. Elena administered a final dose of antibiotics to the mother bear and removed her bandage, pleased to find the wound healing cleanly. The bear examined her treated paw with what looked remarkably like satisfaction before turning her attention to the clinic door. I think she's ready, Elena said softly. With Liam and Grandmother Sophia remaining behind to care for the cubs, Elena and Miguel prepared to follow the bear wherever she chose to lead them. They equipped themselves with emergency medical supplies, satellite communication devices, and defensive measures, just in case the bear's seemingly deliberate behavior was some elaborate misinterpretation on their part. The mother bear's reaction, when they opened the clinic door, defied skepticism. Rather than bolting for freedom or returning immediately to her cubs, she paused on the threshold, looking back at Elena as if confirming she would follow. Then, with purposeful steps, she began, moving away from the village, her massive form cutting a path through the deep snow. She's heading northeast, Miguel noted, consulting his GPS, toward Eagle Ridge. Eagle Ridge was a remote section of the mountains, minimally explored due to its difficult terrain. Few trails penetrated its dense forest, and in winter it was considered essentially impassable. The bear moved deliberately, frequently pausing to ensure her human companions were still following. Her pace accounted for their slower progress through the snow, another behavior that suggested uncanny awareness of their limitations. When they struggled with particularly deep drifts, she would double back and forge a clearer path. Her powerful, body-creating passages they could navigate more easily. After 2 hours of steady travel, they reached the base of Eagle Ridge. The bear paused, waiting as Elena and Miguel caught their breath. "She's taking us up there?" Elena asked, studying the steep, snow-covered slope ahead. Miguel nodded grimly. "Appears so. It's going to get more challenging from here." As if understanding their concern, the bear chose a more gradual approach than a direct ascent, following a series of natural terraces that switchbacked up the ridge. Even so, the humans found themselves struggling to maintain pace, the deep snow and elevation gain taxing their endurance. Midway up the slope, the bear suddenly altered course, veering toward a rock outcropping partially concealed by evergreens. She disappeared into what appeared to be solid rock, then reappeared moments later, huffing urgently. There must be a cave, Elena realized, pushing forward through a snowdrift. The opening was narrow but navigable, a crevice in the rock face that widened into a small cavern beyond. The bear entered first, then waited just inside as Elena and Miguel activated their headlamps and followed cautiously. The beam of Elena's light revealed a scene that stopped her breath. The cave floor was littered with animal remains, not the natural debris of a predator's den, but the systematic evidence of something far more disturbing. At least a dozen small metal traps had been concealed within the cave, several containing the partial remains of smaller mammals. More ominously, larger traps designed for bears or wolves had been positioned near the entrance, though these appeared recently triggered without catching their intended targets. "My God," Miguel whispered, examining the nearest device. "These are illegal snare traps, the kind that were banned decades ago. They're brutal, designed to maim rather than kill outright so the animal can't escape." The mother bear stood watching their discovery, her massive head moving between the humans and the traps, as if confirming they understood what she had shown them. In the beam of their headlamps, Elena could see fresh scarring on the cave floor. Marks, consistent with a large animal struggling against a trapped limb. This is where she was injured, Elena realized. She caught her paw in one of these traps, but somehow managed to break free. She examined the nearest large trap, noting its powerful spring mechanism. The strength it would take to escape this, it's almost unbelievable. Miguel photographed everything methodically, documenting the illegal hunting operation. This isn't just opportunistic poaching. This is systematic. Someone is specifically targeting predators in this area. The bear huffed suddenly, drawing their attention to the back of the cave where the headlamp beams hadn't yet reached. Moving deeper into the cavern, they discovered supply crates containing more traps, snares, and disturbingly, several jars filled with bear gallbladders and paws, highly valuable in black market traditional medicine trade. "This is a major poaching operation," Miguel said grimly, examining a logbook that detailed harvests and payments. "And based on these dates, it's been active for at least 2 years. Elena turned to the mother bear, who watched them with unwavering focus. "You didn't just come to us for treatment. You brought us here to show us this." The realization was staggering in its implications. The bear had not only recognized the human-made objects that had injured her, but had made a deliberate decision to lead humans back to them, an act that suggested a level of cognitive reasoning previously unattributed to non-human species. As they documented the poaching evidence, a distant engine sound echoed outside the cave. The bear's demeanor changed instantly, her ears flattening, body tensing in clear alarm. "Someone's coming," Miguel whispered, killing his headlamp. "Possibly the poachers." They retreated deeper into the cave as the sound of a snowmobile grew louder, then cut off abruptly. Footsteps crunched in the snow outside, accompanied by gruff voices discussing checking the traps and clearing any catches. Elena's heart raced as she realized they were about to come face to face with the people responsible for the bear's suffering. More concerning was how the mother bear would react to encountering her tormentors. Despite her apparently deliberate cooperation thus far, she remained a wild predator with recent trauma associated with humans exactly like those approaching. To Elena's astonishment, the bear made no aggressive movement. Instead, she positioned herself in front of the humans, in what appeared to be a protective stance, her massive body effectively shielding them from immediate view of anyone entering the cave. Two men dressed in heavy winter gear stepped into the cave entrance, carrying rifles and additional traps. They froze when their lights illuminated the enormous grizzly standing just inside. "What the hell?" one man gasped, fumbling for his weapon. Before either poacher could react further, Miguel stepped out from behind the bear, his ranger uniform and badge clearly visible in the beam of his flashlight. "Federal Wildlife Enforcement," he announced with calm authority. "Lower your weapons immediately." The standoff that followed was tense but brief. Faced with a law enforcement officer, documented evidence of felony poaching, and a full-grown grizzly bear that showed no sign of retreating, the poachers surrendered with minimal resistance. As Miguel secured the men with plastic restraints, Elena found herself standing beside the mother bear, an unlikely alliance forged through circumstance and what seemed increasingly like conscious choice on the animal's part. The bear remained calm throughout the confrontation, her behavior so atypical that Elena struggled to reconcile it with everything she had been taught about wildlife behavior. With the poachers secured and authorities notified via satellite phone, they began the journey back to Pine Ridge. The mother bear led once again, now moving with greater urgency, as if aware her cubs had been left behind. The return trip revealed further evidence of the poaching operation's extent. Disturbed areas where traps had been set along game trails, cached supplies hidden under camouflage tarps, and most disturbingly, a collection point where animal parts had been processed for transport. Miguel documented everything for the incoming wildlife enforcement team, building a case that would eventually lead to the dismantling of an international wildlife trafficking network. As they approached the outskirts of Pine Ridge, Elena marveled at the extraordinary sequence of events that had brought them to this point. A wild bear, injured by human cruelty, had sought out human help not just for herself, but to expose the very system that had caused her suffering. The implications for animal cognition research were staggering, suggesting levels of abstract thinking, planning, and intentionality previously undocumented in non-human species. The clinic came into view as dusk fell, its windows glowing warmly against the snowy landscape. The mother bear quickened her pace, huffing softly as they drew closer. Inside, they found the cubs playing under Liam's watchful eye, their improving health evident in their energetic movements. The reunion between mother and cubs was touching in its obvious emotion, her gentle nuzzling and their excited response speaking a language that required no translation. The largest cub's paw had been treated in their absence, his condition already improving under Liam's care. "You were right," Elena told grandmother Sophia as they watched the bear family's reunion. "She is a guardian, not just of her cubs, but of the whole ecosystem. She understood that stopping the poachers would protect many animals, not just bears." The elder nodded, her dark eyes reflecting wisdom born of generations of coexistence with the wilderness. Some animals carry old souls. They remember connections we have forgotten. That evening, as Elena reviewed the extraordinary events with her team, a wildlife service helicopter managed to land in a cleared section of the village square, bringing additional medical supplies and enforcement personnel to process the poaching evidence. Among them was Dr. Harmon Lewis, a renowned wildlife behaviorist who specialized in bear cognition. "When I received your report, I thought it must be exaggerated," Lewis admitted, studying the mother bear through the observation window. "But seeing her behavior myself, it's remarkable. The deliberate problem-solving, the apparent altruism, the communication attempts, these suggest cognitive abilities well beyond what we've documented in wild bears." Elena explained their theory that the bear had been rehabilitated as a cub years earlier, potentially creating a foundation for her unusual human association. "We found evidence of an old tracking collar, consistent with a rehabilitation program that operated north of here 15 years ago." Lewis nodded thoughtfully. "That program was pioneering some controversial socialization methods, allowing cubs more human contact than standard protocols recommended. It was disbanded partly due to concerns about creating bears that were too comfortable around humans." Day, he studied the mother bear with renewed interest. If this is indeed one of their releases, she represents an extraordinary case study in long-term outcomes. As they discussed the implications, Liam interrupted with excitement. The database search came back with a match for her DNA pattern. "According to these records, she's definitely from that rehabilitation program. Her designation was GB7, and there are extensive notes about her unusual behavior even as a cub." Elena scanned the file Liam presented, her pulse quickening as she absorbed its contents. "Subject demonstrated tool use, symbolic recognition, and possible counting abilities," she read aloud. "Caretakers noted apparent attempts at deliberate communication beyond typical operant conditioning responses." The file included faded photographs of a bear cub working with researchers on cognitive tests, sorting objects by color and shape, using sticks to retrieve food from challenging locations, and most remarkably, responding to simple symbol cards with specific behaviors. "They were essentially teaching her a rudimentary language system," Lewis said, his voice reflecting professional awe. "Similar to what's been done with great apes and marine mammals, but never successfully with bears. The program was discontinued before they could publish any significant results." Elena looked through the observation window at the mother bear, who was currently arranging her cubs for sleep in a protective semicircle. "They stopped the research, but she didn't stop learning," she said softly. "She's been building on that foundation her entire life." The final pages of the file contained information that transformed their understanding completely. GB7's primary caretaker had been a young researcher named Elena Petrov, a detail so startling that Elena initially thought she'd misread it. That's not possible," she whispered, feeling the room spin slightly around her. "I never worked with that program." "No," Grandmother Sophia said, approaching quietly from the doorway. "But your mother did." The elderly woman held out a faded photograph that showed a young woman with striking resemblance to Elena, kneeling beside a bear cub with distinctive shoulder scarring. Elena Petrov was the researcher who spent the most time with the special cub. "The village elders remember when she came to study the bears. You were very small then, just a baby yourself." Fragments of memory stirred in Elena's mind, disjointed images of a research cabin, her mother's voice explaining something about her special bear friend, the feeling of soft fur beneath her small hands, memories so early and fragmentary that she had dismissed them as childhood imagination. "My mother died when I was 4, Elena said slowly. "I barely remember her. My father never talked about her work, only that she was a wildlife biologist who specialized in large predators." Grandmother Sophia nodded. Marina brought you with her sometimes. The special cub knew you too. Perhaps that is why this bear recognized something familiar when she came to your clinic. Not just human help, but your specific presence. The revelation stunned everyone present. If true, it suggested not just extraordinary cognitive abilities in the bear, but a decades-long memory that had guided her specifically to the daughter of her former caretaker. A connection spanning 15 years and defying conventional understanding of animal intelligence. Dr. Lewis requested permission to bring in a specialized team to document the bear family's behavior using non-invasive methods. This could revolutionize our understanding of ursine cognition, he explained. If we can establish that she's making these connections deliberately, it would represent a paradigm shift in wildlife cognitive science. Elena found herself protective of the bear's welfare. Any research would have to prioritize her recovery and eventual return to the wild. She's not a laboratory subject. She came to us by choice and should leave the same way. As they discussed the implications into the night, the mother bear watched them through the observation window, her intelligent gaze following their movements with what seemed increasingly like comprehension. Once, when Elena approached the glass, the bear placed her healed paw against it in a gesture so deliberate that tears sprang unexpectedly to Elena's eyes. "I think she remembers," Elena whispered. "Not just humans in general, but something specific about me." That night, after the others had retired, Elena sat alone beside the bear family. The mother lay with her cubs nestled against her, but her eyes remained alert, watching Elena with that unsettling intelligence that now carried new meaning. "Did you know my mother?" Elena asked softly, feeling simultaneously foolish and profoundly moved. "Is that why you came to me?" The bear shifted slightly, extending her healed paw toward Elena in a gesture that could have been coincidental but felt intentional in its precision. Elena carefully reached out, allowing her fingers to rest lightly against the massive paw, a point of contact between species that represented something science was only beginning to understand. The mother bear's eyes held hers steadily, and in that silent exchange, Elena felt a connection that transcended conventional boundaries between wild and human, between instinct and intelligence. The revelation of her mother's connection to this remarkable animal stirred something deep within Elena. Grief for the parent she barely remembered, wonder at the unexpected legacy that had found its way back to her, and a profound sense that the natural world held far more complexity and awareness than humans had allowed themselves to recognize. As snow fell softly outside the clinic windows, Elena made a silent promise, both to the bear who had brought her family to a human doorstep in an act of extraordinary trust, and to the mother whose work had helped create that possibility. She would ensure that this remarkable story wouldn't end with a simple treatment and release. The mother bear's demonstration of advanced cognition deserved recognition, protection, and a deeper understanding of what it might mean for human-wildlife relationships in the future. The hidden secret the wounded bear had revealed wasn't just the poaching operation threatening her forest home. It was the secret of her own remarkable mind, a mind that remembered, reasoned, and reached across the divide between species in ways science was only beginning to comprehend. And perhaps most extraordinarily, it was the secret connection between a young researcher who had seen potential in a bear cub's eyes 15 years ago, and the daughter who had unknowingly completed the circle her mother had begun. Morning brought new challenges and decisions. The cubs required at least another week of care before they would be strong enough for release, particularly the smallest, who still needed nutritional support to fully recover. The mother's physical condition had improved dramatically, her injured paw healing cleanly, though she showed no sign of wanting to leave without her young. Wildlife Services had assembled a specialized rehabilitation plan that would allow the bear family to remain under observation while transitioning back to the wild, a graduated approach that would respect both their wild nature and the unusual circumstances of their rescue. A remote release site had been identified far from poaching activities, but within the mother's established territory with minimal human presence. "We'll set up monitored feeding stations initially," Dr. Lewis explained, "then gradually reduce support as they re-establish natural foraging patterns. Given her history, we want to ensure she maintains appropriate wariness around humans other than the team she's familiar with." Elena found herself assigned as the primary transition specialist, her unexpected connection to the bear making her the natural choice for overseeing the family's return to the wild. It was a role that would keep her in Pine Ridge indefinitely, a prospect that felt increasingly right. The unfolding story attracted attention beyond scientific circles. News of a mother bear who had sought human help and subsequently led authorities to poachers spread rapidly, capturing public imagination. While Elena and her team carefully controlled access to protect the bears from becoming attractions, they recognized the potential educational value in sharing this remarkable case with the world. "People protect what they understand," Elena told Miguel as they prepared the bears for transport to the release site. If her story helps humans recognize that other species have more complex inner lives than we've acknowledged, maybe it changes how we approach conservation. The mother bear observed these preparations with her now familiar attentiveness, her behavior suggesting awareness of the transition ahead. When the specialized transport containers arrived, she investigated them thoroughly before allowing her cubs to approach, her actions showing the problem-solving intelligence that had so astounded researchers. On the morning of their departure, Grandmother Sophia arrived at the clinic carrying a small wooden box. "This belonged to your mother," she told Elena privately. "She left it with my family before her final research trip, asking that it be kept safe until it could be returned to her. When she did not return..." The elder's voice trailed off respectfully. Inside the box, Elena found research journals documenting her mother's work with GB7, detailed observations that went far beyond official reports. The final entry, dated just days before her fatal accident in the mountains, expressed a vision remarkable in its foresight. What GB7 demonstrates is not just intelligence as we conventionally measure it, but a different kind of awareness, an ability to perceive connections between actions and consequences across broader spans of time and space than we've recognized in non-human species. If we learn to listen to what she and others like her are telling us, we might discover that consciousness itself is not the human monopoly we've assumed it to be. Tears blurred Elena's vision as she read her mother's words. A scientific legacy, rediscovered, and a personal connection restored through the most unexpected messenger. When she looked up, the mother bear was watching her through the observation window, that steady gaze now carrying layers of meaning Elena was only beginning to comprehend. The journey to the release site took them deep into the Blackwater Mountains, to a remote valley that offered ideal bear habitat far from human interference. As the transport cages were carefully positioned in a protected clearing, Elena felt both professional satisfaction and personal emotion colliding in her chest. The scientific protocol dictated minimal interaction during release, but nothing about this case had followed standard procedures. When the moment came to open the transport doors, Elena found herself kneeling at eye level with the mother bear, addressing her directly in a quiet voice. "I don't know how much you understand, but this is your home now. It's safe, no traps, no poachers. Your cubs can grow up without the dangers you faced." She hesitated, then added more personally, "Thank you for finding me, for trusting me, for showing us what we needed to see. The mother bear's response defied conventional wildlife behavior. Rather than bolting for freedom when the cage opened, she emerged with dignity and purpose, gathering her cubs with gentle huffs, before turning to face Elena one final time. For a breathtaking moment, bear and human regarded each other across the divide between their worlds, a connection that honored both the wild nature of one and the compassionate science of the other. Then, with deliberate movements, the mother bear led her family toward the forest edge. At the boundary between clearing and wilderness, she paused, looking back as if memorizing the humans who had helped her. The cubs followed her gaze, their young eyes bright with curiosity rather than fear. As Elena watched them disappear into the dense underbrush, she knew this ending was also a beginning. The research team would monitor from a respectful distance, learning from the bear family's adaptation while ensuring their protection. Elena herself would split her time between the clinic in Pine Ridge and field observations, bridging the worlds of healthcare and research just as her mother had before her. The hidden secret the wounded bear had revealed extended far beyond a poaching operation, or even the remarkable story of cross-species trust that had unfolded in a village clinic. It was the secret that humans had been slow to recognize throughout history, that intelligence, consciousness, and purposeful communication are not exclusively human domains. They exist throughout the natural world, in forms we are only beginning to understand if we have the humility and patience to recognize them. In the months that followed, Elena established a research foundation dedicated to non-invasive studies of animal cognition, naming it after her mother. The first subject was, of course, the remarkable bear family, whose ongoing observations yielded insights that challenged conventional boundaries in cognitive science. The mother bear continued to demonstrate problem-solving abilities and apparent, intentional communication that suggested self-awareness previously undocumented in ursine species. More personally, Elena found herself embraced by the community of Pine Ridge, her work at the clinic expanding to include both wildlife treatment and educational outreach. Liam continued as her apprentice, his knowledge of traditional approaches, complementing her scientific training in ways that honored both traditions. Occasionally, wildlife cameras would capture the mother bear with her growing cubs at the edges of their monitoring area. In one remarkable image that eventually became the symbol of Elena's research foundation, the mother bear stood beside a clear mountain stream, her reflection visible in the water beside her as she gazed directly at the camera. That steady, intelligent gaze seemed to ask a question that science was only beginning to formulate, not whether animals can think, but whether humans can learn to recognize the different ways consciousness manifests throughout the natural world. The wounded bear who brought her cubs to a village doctor had revealed her secret, not just to Elena, but to everyone willing to see beyond conventional boundaries between human and wild. It was the secret that indigenous cultures had recognized for millennia and modern science was slowly rediscovering. That healing flows in both directions when we acknowledge our kinship with the more than human world. On clear nights, Elena often walked to the edge of Pine Ridge, looking out toward the mountains where her remarkable patient now roamed freely with her growing cubs. Sometimes she imagined she could feel the mother bear's awareness reaching back across the distance. An acknowledgement between two intelligent species who had, for a brief but profound moment, shared understanding across the ancient divide. In those moments, Elena felt her mother's legacy continuing through her own hands and heart, the work of building bridges between worlds that had never been as separate as humans had imagined. The wounded bear had brought more than her cubs. To the village doctor, she had brought a reminder that healing is never complete until it extends beyond the individual to embrace the connections that sustain all life. The dream woke Elena with a start. the same one she'd been having since the bear family returned to the wild 3 months ago. In it, the mother bear stood atop Eagle Ridge, her silhouette stark against a blood-red sunset, pawing urgently at the ground. Behind her, dark shapes moved through the trees, human shapes with glinting metal in their hands. The dream always ended the same way. The bear looking directly at Elena with those intelligent eyes, communicating something urgent that remained just beyond understanding. Elena rubbed her face, glancing at the clock. 3:17 a.m. Outside her window, the spring rain that had been falling steadily for days continued its rhythm against the roof of her cabin. The seasonal melt combined with unprecedented rainfall had swollen streams throughout the Blackwater Mountains to dangerous levels. Roads into the more remote areas were washed out, creating islands of wilderness temporarily cut off from human access, including the area where the bear family had been released. She reached for her mother's journal on the nightstand, a habit she'd developed whenever the dream disturbed her sleep. The worn leather cover felt smooth beneath her fingers. As she flipped to the final entries, her mother's handwriting, so similar to her own, filled the pages with observations about GB7's remarkable cognitive abilities. One passage in particular drew her attention each time. When bears communicate with each other, they use subtle body language, vocalizations, and scent marking that we humans, with our limited senses, can easily miss. What if GB7's unusual behavior isn't just adaptation to human interaction, but an attempt to bridge communication between species? What if she's been trying to tell us something all along, and we've been too limited in our understanding to hear it? A knock at her door startled Elena from her thoughts. Miguel stood on her porch, rain dripping from his ranger hat, his expression grave. "The Eastern Monitoring Station picked up something," he said without preamble. "You need to see this." 10 minutes later, Elena stood in the research center's monitoring room, staring at footage captured by their most remote wildlife camera. The timestamp showed it had been recorded just after midnight, less than 3 hours ago. The image quality was poor due to the heavy rain, but what it showed was unmistakable. The mother bear, her distinctive shoulder scar visible even in the low light, frantically digging at the base of a large pine tree. 2 of her cubs huddled nearby under a rock overhang. The third, the smallest one they had nicknamed Scholar, was nowhere to be seen. "There's more," Miguel said quietly, advancing. The footage. The next segment showed the mother bear abandoning her digging to pace in distressed circles. Then, in a behavior that sent chills down Elena's spine, she stood on her hind legs and deliberately clawed 3 vertical marks into the trunk of the pine, followed by a horizontal line through them. The exact symbol she had used months ago to indicate danger. "She's asking for help," Elena whispered, certainty flooding through her. "Something's happened to her smallest cub." Dr. Lewis studied the footage with a scientist's careful skepticism. "We need to be cautious about anthropomorphizing. This is deliberate communication," Elena interrupted, pointing to the symbol carved into the tree. "She's using the same danger mark from my mother's research at the exact camera location closest to our release site. That's not coincidence." Liam entered the room, carrying satellite imagery of the eastern sector. "The flooding has created a significant landslide here," he said, pointing to an area less than a mile from where the bear had been filmed. "It could have separated the smallest cub from the family." Eleanor's mind raced through possibilities. The smallest cub, though much improved from his near-death experience during the winter, was still more vulnerable than his siblings. If he had been caught in a landslide or trapped by rising water. "We need to go there," she said decisively. "Now." Miguel shook his head. "The roads are completely washed out. Even the emergency services helicopters are grounded because of the storm. "There's the old logging trail," Grandmother Sophia said from the doorway, her sudden appearance startling everyone. Despite the early hour, the elder had arrived with uncanny timing, as if somehow aware of the unfolding situation. "It follows. The ridgeline. The water cannot reach it." "That trail hasn't been maintained in decades," Miguel objected. "It's probably impassable." "Not to those who know where to look," the elder replied with quiet confidence. "My grandfather showed me the hidden paths when I was young. They remain if you have eyes to see them." Elena made her decision quickly. "Miguel, prepare emergency. Veterinary supplies. Liam, bring the portable tracking equipment. Grandmother Sophia, we'll need your guidance on that trail." She turned to Dr. Lewis. "Monitor the cameras and satellite phone. If the cub appears or the weather changes, we need to know immediately." The scientist cleared his throat. "Elena, I understand your concern, but this level of response to what might simply be normal bear behavior." "This isn't normal bear behavior," Elena cut in, her voice steady with conviction. "You've seen the evidence of her cognitive abilities. She's asking for help, and I intend to provide it." As the team prepared for their journey, Elena packed her mother's journal alongside the medical supplies. Something told her the answers they might need were in those pages, observations and insights from the researcher who had first recognized the remarkable mind behind those intelligent bear eyes. The old logging trail proved more challenging than anticipated. Decades of disuse had allowed nature to reclaim much of the path, and even with Grandmother Sophia's guidance, progress was slow. The rain had transformed sections into treacherous mudslides, while fallen trees created obstacles that required careful navigation. Yet Elena pressed forward with unwavering determination, driven by the image of the mother bear's desperate communication. Every hour that passed reduced the chances of finding the missing cub alive, especially in these conditions. "We're approaching the camera location," Miguel announced after nearly 3 hours of difficult hiking. "The bear's marking should be just ahead." The pine tree stood as a solitary sentinel in a small clearing, its massive trunk bearing the fresh claw marks exactly as they had appeared in the footage. Elena approached slowly, noting additional signs that had been invisible to the camera. Paw prints now filling with rainwater, disturbed earth where the bear had been digging, and most significantly, tufts of fur caught on low branches that matched the distinctive coloring of the smallest cub. "He was here," she confirmed, examining the evidence with professional thoroughness, despite her growing concern. "Recent tracks suggest he was moving in this direction before the mother began her signaling behavior." Liam activated the portable tracking device that would detect the microchip they had implanted in each cub before release. "I'm getting a faint signal," he reported after several tense minutes of scanning. "It's coming from the east, down toward the river, but it's very weak." Elena's heart sank. The eastern direction led directly to the landslide area they had identified from satellite imagery. If the small cub had been caught in that natural disaster. "We need to hurry," she said, already moving in the direction Liam indicated. The terrain grew increasingly treacherous as they descended toward the river valley. The landslide had transformed the familiar landscape into an alien moonscape of mud, uprooted trees, and debris carried downstream by the floodwaters. The tracking signal grew stronger, but remained erratic, suggesting the cub was moving or perhaps being moved by the elements. A sudden vocalization stopped the group in their tracks, not the deep roar of an adult bear, but the distinctive whimpering cry of a cub in distress. The sound came from a tangle of fallen trees and mud near what had once been the riverbank, but was now an expanded floodplain. "There!" Liam pointed to a small dark shape barely visible among the debris. The smallest cub lay partially trapped beneath a fallen branch, mud covering much of his body. He was alive, but clearly exhausted, his attempts to free himself growing weaker with each effort. Most concerning was the rising water level around him. With the river still swelling from upstream rainfall, his position would be completely submerged. Within hours, Elena assessed the situation with the calm efficiency of a medical professional, though her heart raced with emotion. The branch has him pinned, but doesn't appear to have caused serious injury. The main danger is hypothermia and drowning if the water continues to rise. We need to approach carefully, Miguel cautioned. The mother could be nearby and might perceive us as threats. As if summoned by his words, a powerful huffing sound came from the forest edge. The mother bear emerged from the trees, her massive form somehow even more imposing in the wild than Elena remembered from their clinic encounters. Behind her, the two larger cubs watched cautiously from the undergrowth. Elena expected the mother to display defensive behavior, standard for any wild bear with cubs, especially when humans approached an injured offspring. Instead, the mother bear paused at the forest's edge, her intelligent eyes fixed on Elena, with unmistakable recognition. "She remembers you," Grandmother Sophia said softly. "More importantly, she trusts you." With slow, deliberate movements that radiated calm intention, the mother bear began approaching the trapped cub. Rather than positioning herself between the humans and her offspring, the typical protective stance, she moved to the opposite side of the entrapment, looking expectantly at Elena. The message couldn't have been clearer if she had spoken aloud. "We need to work together." Elena turned to her team. "Miguel, prepare a sedative dose, minimal, just enough to keep the cub calm during extraction. Liam, bring the thermal blankets and fluid replacement. We need to work quickly before the water rises further." The mother bear watched their preparations with remarkable patience, occasionally glancing at the rising water with visible anxiety. When Elena finally approached the trapped cub, medical kit in hand, the mother made no aggressive move. Instead, she positioned herself where she could maintain eye contact with both her offspring and the humans attempting to help. "I'm going to help him," Elena said softly, knowing the words meant nothing to the bear, but feeling compelled to communicate her intentions anyway. Just like before. Working with Miguel, she carefully administered a mild sedative to the frightened cub, then assessed the entrapment situation. The fallen branch was too heavy for them to lift directly, but by using a smaller log as a lever, they might be able to raise it enough to extract the young bear. "On 3, Elena instructed, positioning the makeshift lever while Liam prepared to pull the cub free. 1, 2, 3. With a straining effort, they raised the branch just enough for Liam to quickly slide the cub out from under it. The mother bear watched intently, but made no move to interfere, her trust in these specific humans apparently overriding her natural protective instincts. Once freed, the cub required immediate attention. His body temperature had dropped dangerously, low, and one leg showed signs of injury from the entrapment. Elena worked efficiently, cleaning and examining the leg, while Liam wrapped the small bear in thermal blankets. "It's not broken," she announced with relief. "Likely a muscle strain. That will heal with rest. The hypothermia is our biggest concern right now." Throughout the treatment, the mother bear remained watchful but calm, occasionally communicating with soft vocalizations to her other cubs who waited at the forest edge. Her behavior continued to defy conventional wildlife management expectations. She was neither fleeing with her healthy offspring nor displaying aggression toward the humans handling her injured cub. "She understands we're helping," Grandmother Sophia observed, "just as she understood to come to us in the first place." Once the smallest cub was stabilized and beginning to warm, Elena faced a difficult decision. Standard wildlife protocol would suggest transporting the injured cub back to the clinic for continued treatment, potentially separating him from his family. Yet something about the mother bear's demeanor, Her clear intelligence and the trust she was demonstrating made Elena hesitate. "We're not going to take him," she said finally. "We'll complete the emergency treatment here, then allow the family to remain together." Dr. Lewis would likely disagree with this approach, but Elena felt certain it was right. The mother bear had specifically sought human help without surrendering her wild autonomy or that of her cubs. Respecting that choice seemed essential to honoring the remarkable relationship that had developed. As the smallest cub began to regain strength under their care, Elena prepared him for return to his mother. The mild sedative was wearing off, and though still weak, he was alert and responsive. With careful movements, Elena carried him to a spot midway between their team and where the mother bear waited. "He's going to be okay," she said, gently placing the cub on dry ground. "He needs rest and gradual return to normal activity, but the leg will heal completely." The mother bear approached without hesitation, her massive form moving with surprising gentleness as she inspected her returned offspring. She sniffed him thoroughly, paying special attention to the leg Elena had treated before giving his face, a tender lick that spoke of relief transcending species. What happened next defied explanation within conventional wildlife behavior frameworks. The mother bear, after ensuring her smallest cub was indeed recovering, turned her attention directly to Elena. With deliberate movements, she approached, until she stood just a few feet away, close enough that Elena could feel the bear's warm breath in the cool spring air. For a breathtaking moment, they regarded each other eye to eye. Doctor and patient, human and bear, two mothers separated by species yet connected by something more fundamental. Then, with a movement that stunned even grandmother Sophia, the mother bear lowered her massive head in what could only be interpreted as a gesture of acknowledgement and gratitude. "She's thanking you," Liam whispered, his voice tight with emotion. The moment passed quickly, the mother bear returning to her cubs with efficient movements that suggested urgency. The river continued to rise, and the cleared path to higher ground grew narrower with each passing minute. With gentle nudges, she gathered her family, including the weakened but mobile smallest cub, and began leading them toward the forest edge. At the tree line, she paused, looking back at the humans who had once again helped her family survive. Her intelligent eyes held Elena's for one final moment of connection before she disappeared into the protection of the ancient forest, her cubs following close behind. The team made their way back to Pine Ridge as the storm finally began to ease, the day's events settling into a silence filled with individual reflection. What they had witnessed challenged fundamental assumptions about wildlife behavior, interspecies communication, and the traditional boundaries between human and animal consciousness. That evening, as Elena updated Dr. Lewis and the research team on their remarkable encounter, a new satellite transmission arrived from the Eastern Monitoring Station. The footage showed the mother bear and all three cubs safe in a new location, a natural cave formation well above the floodline. The smallest cub moved with a slight limp but was clearly recovering, staying close to his mother as she arranged dry bedding in their temporary shelter. Most remarkably, before settling her family for rest, the mother bear approached the camera directly and repeated the same gesture she had made to Elena in person, that deliberate lowering of her head that somehow bridged the communication gap between species. "This goes beyond conditioning or simple association," Dr. Lewis admitted, his scientific skepticism finally giving way to wonder. "She's demonstrating awareness of the cameras as communication devices, understanding that humans will view this footage. That requires a mental model of how humans perceive and interact with the world." Elena nodded, her thoughts returning to her mother's final journal entry. What if she's been trying to tell us something all along and we've been too limited in our understanding to hear it? The spring floods eventually receded, leaving the Blackwater Mountains transformed in subtle ways. New channels carved through ancient forests, meadows expanded by deposited silt, wildlife corridors altered by fallen trees and shifted terrain. Nature's perpetual adaptation continued, with animals adjusting their patterns to the changed landscape. The bear family thrived despite these challenges. Regular monitoring showed the smallest cub regaining full mobility, now keeping pace with his siblings as they learned hunting and foraging skills from their remarkable mother. Their territory expanded to include higher elevation regions less susceptible to flooding, a strategic adaptation that demonstrated the mother's learning capacity. For Elena, the flood rescue marked a turning point in her research approach. With funding secured through Dr. Lewis's academic connections, she established a dedicated interspecies communication study centered on the remarkable bear family. The project combined traditional wildlife observation with innovative communication, methods designed to bridge the gap between human and ursine perception. "We're not trying to teach bears to be human," she explained to skeptical colleagues. "We're trying to create shared communication channels that respect the cognitive abilities each species brings to the interaction." The research station introduced a series of symbol boards at key locations throughout the bear's territory, simplified versions of the communication tools her mother had pioneered 15 years earlier. Each board featured basic pictographs representing concepts relevant to bear existence: food sources, weather conditions, predator presence, and human activity. Most wildlife biologists predicted failure. Wild bears, they argued, would either ignore the boards or investigate them briefly as potential food sources before losing interest. The scientific community remained deeply invested in the paradigm that true symbolic communication was a uniquely human capacity, with limited exceptions. Among great apes and certain marine mammals, for 2 months the predictions seemed accurate. The camera stations recorded occasional curiosity from passing wildlife, including brief investigations by the mother bear's larger cubs, but no meaningful interaction with the symbols. Then, on a clear summer morning, the cameras captured something extraordinary. The mother bear approached the nearest symbol board alone, without her cubs. She studied it with focused attention, moving from one pictograph to another as if refreshing her memory of their meanings. Then, with deliberate precision, she pressed 3 symbols in sequence, the images representing food, danger, and valley. Elena reviewed the footage with racing heart, scarcely able to believe what she was seeing. "She's trying to tell us something specific," she told her team. "She's warning us about contaminated food sources in the valley." Initial skepticism gave way to urgency when rangers investigating the lower valley discovered a significant toxic algae bloom in several ponds, a seasonal phenomenon accelerated by the spring flooding and summer heat. The affected water sources had already claimed several smaller animals and bears feeding on fish from these ponds would likely suffer neurological damage or death. "She recognized the danger before our monitoring systems detected it," Miguel said, shaking his head in amazement, "and she deliberately communicated that information to us." The incident transformed the research project and Elena's place within the scientific community. What had begun as a specialized study of one unusual bear family expanded into a broader examination of animal cognition and interspecies communication. Researchers from around the world applied to join Elena's team, bringing diverse perspectives from linguistics, comparative psychology, and conservation biology. Throughout the growing scientific attention, Elena remained focused on the profound relationship with the specific bear family that had started this journey. The mother bear continued to use the symbol boards regularly, communicating information about environmental conditions and potential threats that consistently proved accurate when investigated. More remarkably, she began teaching her cubs to use the communication system. The smallest one, Scholar, showed particular aptitude, quickly grasping the connection between symbols and real-world references. By autumn, cameras recorded him, independently using symbols to indicate his own observations, suggesting the beginning of a communication tradition that might extend beyond a single bear generation. "She's creating culture," Dr. Lewis observed with academic reverence, "not just passing on survival skills, but teaching abstract symbolic thinking to the next generation." This challenges everything we thought we knew about ursine cognitive capacity. Elena's research foundation grew beyond her initial expectations, eventually establishing permanent headquarters in Pine Ridge. The village transformed from a remote outpost into a renowned center for wildlife research, bringing economic opportunities while maintaining the sacred relationship with the surrounding wilderness that Grandmother Sophia's people had always honored. As the bear family prepared for their second winter since the clinic encounter, Elena reflected on the extraordinary journey that had unfolded from that desperate night when a wounded mother had brought her cubs to a village doctor. What began as an emergency medical intervention had evolved into a pioneering communication bridge between species, a connection that honored both the wild nature of the bears and the compassionate science of the humans who sought to understand them. On the anniversary of their first meeting, Elena hiked alone to a special observation point overlooking the valley where the bear family had established their primary territory. The autumn colors painted the landscape in brilliant golds and crimsons, nature's final flourish before winter's approach. She wasn't entirely surprised when the distinctive huffing sound announced the mother bear's arrival. Somehow, across the barriers of species and language, they had developed a connection that transcended conventional understanding. The massive bear emerged from the forest edge, her coat gleaming in the afternoon sunlight, her movements displaying the confidence of an apex predator in her prime. Alone, without her now nearly grown cubs, she approached Elena with that same deliberate intention that had characterized their relationship from the beginning. There was no fear in her movements, no aggression, only the calm awareness of two intelligent beings who had found a way to communicate across the ancient divide between their kinds. Elena remained seated on the rocky outcropping, respecting the wild nature of this extraordinary animal by neither retreating nor approaching. The mother bear settled a comfortable distance away, her intelligent eyes fixing on Elena with unmistakable recognition. "Your family is thriving," Elena said softly, knowing the words themselves meant nothing, while the calm tone might convey something across the species barrier. "Your smallest one has grown strong. You've taught them well." The bear watched her, with that steady gaze that seemed to contain understanding beyond what science could currently explain. Then, with deliberate movements, she used her paw to scrape a pattern in the soft earth between them. Not the danger symbol this time, but a new configuration, a circle with a smaller circle inside it. Elena's breath caught as she recognized the symbol from her mother's journal. During the rehabilitation program 15 years earlier, this particular mark had been used to represent connection or together, a concept the young GB7 had seemingly grasped despite her wild nature. "You remember," Elena whispered, emotion tightening her throat. "After all these years, you remember what my mother taught you." The mother bear maintained eye contact, her expression unreadable to human perception, yet somehow conveying an awareness that transcended ordinary animal cognition. She added another mark beside the first, a straight line with a small curve at the end. According to the journal, this symbol had represented continue or future. Connection, future. The simplicity of the communication belied its profound implications. This wild bear, drawing on lessons from 15 years earlier, was deliberately expressing a concept that spanned time and species boundaries, the continuation of a relationship begun by Elena's mother and now carried forward through her daughter. Elena's scientific training battled with the emotion of the moment. There were 1,000 alternative explanations for what she was witnessing: coincidental marking behaviors, pattern recognition without conceptual understanding, even her own human tendency to project meaning onto animal behavior. Yet something deeper than academic knowledge told her this communication was genuine. "I understand," she said, reaching carefully into her pack to retrieve the journal that had once belonged to her mother. She opened it to the final page, where her mother's handwriting documented her hopes for the young bear's future. With deliberate movements, Elena placed a small stone on the open journal, then stepped back. The mother bear studied the object from her position, nostrils flaring as she detected the scents it carried: paper, leather, and perhaps some lingering trace of the woman who had first recognized her remarkable mind 15 years earlier. She made no move to approach it, respecting the boundary Elena had established, yet her focused attention suggested recognition of its significance. For nearly an hour, human and bear shared the mountain overlook in a silence that contained more communication than words could have achieved. As the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, the mother bear finally rose, stretching her massive form before turning toward the forest. At the tree line, she paused, looking back at Elena with that same intelligent gaze that had begun their extraordinary journey. Then, with unhurried dignity, she disappeared into the ancient woods that were her true home. Elena remained on the overlook until dusk, watching the first stars appear above the darkening mountains. The journal lay open beside her, its pages containing the beginning of a story that continued to unfold in ways her mother could never have anticipated, but would surely have celebrated. The wounded bear who had brought her cubs to a village doctor had revealed a secret greater than anyone could have imagined: that the boundaries between human and animal minds were far more permeable than science had recognized, and that healing could flow in both directions when those boundaries were approached with respect and openness. In the language of science, this understanding revolutionized wildlife conservation and cognitive research. In the language of story, it reminded humans of what indigenous wisdom had always known: that animals are not lesser beings awaiting human classification, but different kinds of persons sharing a world of intelligence, communication, and connection that transcends the limitations of any single species' perspective. And in the language of the heart, the silent understanding that had passed between a wounded mother bear and a compassionate doctor on a snowy winter night. It spoke of recognition across difference, of trust despite danger, and of the extraordinary possibilities that emerge when we acknowledge the consciousness that exists beyond our own. The research foundation Elena established in Pine Ridge eventually expanded beyond its initial focus on bear cognition to encompass broader studies of interspecies communication throughout the Blackwater Mountains ecosystem. Wolves, ravens, elk, and other species demonstrated cognitive abilities that challenged conventional understanding, suggesting a complex web of awareness connecting the diverse inhabitants of the wilderness. Yet at the center of this expanding understanding remained the remarkable bear family, the wounded mother who had crossed the boundary between wild and human worlds, and her 3 cubs who grew into the first generation of bears able to communicate deliberately with humans through a shared symbolic language. Their stories spread far beyond scientific circles, capturing public imagination and transforming cultural perceptions of wildlife intelligence. Documentary films, educational programs, and conservation initiatives drew inspiration from the Pine Ridge bears, creating a ripple effect that influenced wildlife management practices worldwide. For Elena personally, the journey brought healing of a different kind, connection to the mother she had barely known, continuation of a scientific legacy she hadn't realized was hers to carry, and discovery of her own place in the ongoing dialogue between human understanding and wild wisdom. Grandmother Sophia, watching the unfolding story with the patient perspective of her people's traditions, perhaps summarized it best. When we forget that we are only one voice in the great conversation of life, we become deaf to the wisdom being spoken all around us. Your mother began to listen. You have continued. Now others are beginning to hear as well. The mother bear and her growing cubs remained wild as they should be. Their home, the ancient forests and mountain meadows where their kind had thrived for millennia. Yet the bridge of understanding they helped create transformed both the human and bear communities that shared the Blackwater Mountains, creating a model of coexistence based on mutual recognition rather than separation or dominance. Years later, researchers would document the grown cubs, establishing their own territories and families, passing to their offspring both traditional bear knowledge and the unique capacity for symbolic communication pioneered by their remarkable mother. The cultural transmission continued across generations, creating what scientists eventually termed linguistic bears, a subpopulation with distinctive cognitive adaptations shaped by their unusual history of interspecies connection. The wounded bear who brought her cubs to a village doctor had initiated a healing that extended far beyond her own injured paw. She had helped mend humanity's broken understanding of our place within the more-than-human world, not as separate masters, but as participants in a complex conversation of many voices, many minds, and many ways of knowing. In Pine Ridge Village, they tell this story to their children, not as legend, but as living history. They speak of the night when a mother bear chose trust over fear, when a village doctor chose compassion over protocol, and when the ancient boundary between human and wild briefly dissolved to reveal the truth that had always existed beyond its artificial divide. And sometimes, on clear autumn evenings when the mountains are painted gold and crimson, visitors to the research center observation deck glimpse a distinctive bear with a scarred shoulder standing at the forest edge, watching the human settlement, with intelligent eyes that seem to hold wisdom accumulated across two very different worlds. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.